Holy crap, y'all. So many different trades just happened in the NHL that we need to talk about. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be grading every single one. Not even just the most recent Brian Dumoulin trade, but we're going all the way back to the Ryan Lindgren deal to go through every trade that I missed. So that begs the question, with all the pre-trade deadline day deals, what do I think of each one, and which teams do I think won each trade? Make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the trades today, and hit that subscribe button for more trade content as we go to the trade deadline tomorrow with the live streams and videos that you guys won't want to miss. Now, how today's going to work is that we're going to go through all the trades over the last week, going by the oldest first and then the newest last. The oldest being the Ryan Lindgren trade between Colorado and New York, which didn't really surprise me, but in terms of the trade package, certainly did. With, of course, Ryan Lindgren at 50% retention going to the Avs with Jimmy Vesey and Hank Kemp, a prospect in the NCAA, and to the Rangers going at Calvin DeHaan, Juuso Parson, and 2025 conditional second and fourth round picks. This was really the first idea we got that this would be a seller's market at this deadline, and it was a pretty big surprise, especially considering Adam Fox's injury. I wasn't really sure if the Rangers were actually going to go ahead with a Ryan Lindgren trade, but they did, and I think they executed it at the right time. Lindgren was somebody, especially with the injuries, was just not looking like a fit with the Rangers anymore. On any pair they tried to make it work with, he just didn't really seem to fit. He did have a pretty solid debut from Colorado from what I saw, so hopefully in a new system, he can get back to the level that he was at a couple years ago, which was a solid middle pair defenseman. And for the Avs especially, they wanted more of a physical element, and Lindgren absolutely does bring that. I'm not sure how impactful he's going to be, but especially down the lineup, of course, with the Taves and Makar pair right up there in the first pair, he's going to get a better opportunity in more shelter minutes, which is something that I think Lindgren especially has needed. And so far too, it looks like Calvin DeHaan has also been pretty good for the Rangers, so it seems like it's benefiting both sides involved. As for the trade grades, I'm going to give the Colorado Avalanche a straight B, solid deal for them. But I think for the Rangers, I'm going to give them an A-. I think getting rid of Lindgren was the right decision, and the value coming back was pretty strong. Now going on to, in my opinion, another pretty big win-win here between the Florida Panthers and the Chicago Blackhawks, a trade that a few months ago might have come out of nowhere for y'all, but we started to see Seth Jones formally request a trade from Chicago, and a deal came up pretty quick. As you guys can see in the graphics, of course, provided by NHL Trade Alert on Twitter, highly recommend them. To Florida goes Seth Jones at 25% retention and a 2026 fourth round pick. In exchange for the Blackhawks, they get goaltender Spencer Knight and a 2026 first round pick. Now, I first wanted to talk about Seth Jones because this is something that, even though I didn't get to make a video on it, I really wanted to, because in Seth Jones' case, I think he's somebody that's been getting underrated in the NHL sphere as of late. Even though he's 30 years old and making, of course, the big money that he is, previously at $9.5 million with Chicago, he's somebody that I still think as an offensive play driver, a power play quarterback, has a lot of value, and I just don't think is the number one defenseman that he has needed to be in Chicago. I think in a lesser role, he could still do some big damage, and I think that's evident for what he's been in times with Columbus, and in his early days with Chicago, just how impactful he was. This year, 27 points in 42 games, on pace for 39 points in 63 games. I think he'll be just fine in Florida, and exactly the type of contender that can insulate him well and really allow Jones to do what he does best without having to worry about the defensive game that isn't quite there anymore. But a big part of this trade is also the salary retention, with Chicago retaining 25% of the deal. That takes Jones down to $7 million, which I think is a lot more manageable. And honestly, for Jones at points, I think he could absolutely be worth that deal. Maybe a little bit less, but for a team like Florida that could use some stability on the defense, Jones, I think, could be really interesting there, and I think could make a big impact, especially come playoff time. And then we go into what Chicago got back in this deal, which was pretty surprising as well. Even though the Blackhawks did retain 25%, I didn't really think it would bring back this much value for them. Of course, you got Spencer Knight as the big player going back, somebody that is a prospect up and down, but this year is mostly as a backup in the NHL level, behind Bobrovsky, of course, in Florida, with a .907 save percentage. He hasn't been bad, he hasn't been good. I don't think he's been right in the middle. He's been all right for Florida. But as you can see, in the first debut game for Chicago, he was absolutely amazing. I think saved 41 of 42 shots, I believe, was prolific. Had a great save as well against Fogel as well early in that game. He was peppered in the shot department, but came through unscathed. He was brilliant. And if he can be just a solid goaltender for Chicago, I think that's a great trade to begin with. Then you factor in, of course, the first round pick, and I think this is looking perfect for a deal that I really didn't expect Chicago to get a whole lot for. They got a lot for him. Now, I do think for Florida, my opinion on this trade would have been a little bit worse if they couldn't have gone out and got another goaltender. They did get Vitek Vanacek. I don't think he's the greatest goaltender out there, But the Panthers did, of course, trade their backup goaltender, so I wanted to see them go after somebody that could solidify that spot. Now that that has happened as well, and we have that foresight, I think for both teams, this is a complete win-win. In terms of the trade grades, I'm going to give Florida a straight A and Chicago a A+. I think for both teams, this fills perfect holes in their system, and especially, again, for Chicago, getting a first-rounder, Spencer Knight. I would have maybe saw one of those pieces going back in a Jones trade, but not both. That's great value for them. Now on to a little bit more of a smaller one, but still the one that could impact the playoff race, and that is the Gustav Nyquist trade, which saw Nashville trading Gustav Nyquist at 50% retention, interestingly, to the Minnesota Wild, with the Wild cap structure and it being all over the place, them being really stuck to the cap. That retention was needed, but Nashville was able to command a 2026 second round pick for him, which honestly, I think was pretty great value too. Nyquist has been a player that's 35 years old that has had his production up and down, fluctuating completely, especially in his time with Nashville. In his first season, getting 75 points and 52 assists in 81 games. This year, down to 21 points now in 59 games when you combine his games with both the Preds and the Wild. As you can see, hasn't made a complete impact there with Minnesota yet, but there still is, of course, time. I like the slipperiness of Nyquist and how much he just commands the ice with his skill set, but it'll be interesting to see how that translates to the Wild, because this year, he hasn't really been as impactful as you'd like with Nashville, and we'll see if he's able to turn that page. For the Preds, though, to get a second-round pick for a 35-year-old who really even wasn't that great this season for them, I think is a pretty big success. I think a lot of that value is more so because of his season last year and just how prolific that was in Minnesota, trying to capture that lightning in a bottle. But still, I think a second-round pick is serviceable, and I think for the Preds especially, that's the type of move they needed to make. I think for them, they need to reset, retool for next year, gather a bunch of picks that if they do want to trade that for some reinforcements at the draft, they'll have the opportunity to do so. Minnesota, it could be solved for them, but in terms of the trade grades, I think for Nashville, I'm going to give an A-, and for Minnesota, I'm going to give a B-. Now we go into the Trent Frederick trade, which was a pretty big three-team doozy, and I think an interesting one too, especially since it's not just a random fifth-round pick or something going back to the team that retained. It's a pretty big prospect in Shane Lachance. Now we'll get into him last. As for the actual details, the Bruins, of course, traded Frederick at 75% retention, plus Max Jones and Peter Hauser, in exchange for Max Wanner, a 2025 second-round pick, and a 2026 fourth-round pick. Now, to get him out of the way first, the first player I want to talk about is Shane Lachance, the prospect the Devils got in this deal, former Oilers sixth-rounder. He's one of the more underrated prospects in the league, in my opinion. Was my underrated prospect pick for Edmonton in a video I did at the beginning of the season. But as you can see, big boy, 6'5", 218 pounds, is a really good puck handler for his size, especially in tight in the net. He's somebody that around that pressure can just do so much around it. I do think the big issue for him is the acceleration and how much he's able to speed up the ice. I think for him, that is going to be maybe a weakness that maybe puts him outside of a true spot in the NHL, but I could see him being a bottom sixer for the goal scoring, the presence he has around the net. Once play is established, Lachance is a very effective player, and as a captain for BU, brings strong leadership as well. That will take him far. Still on the prospect side, going to the Boston Bruins is Maximus Wanner, a fantastic name, by the way. 6'3", right shot D. Yeah, makes sense. Has a pretty solid AHL rookie season last year. Hasn't played as much this season. We'll see. But for the Bruins, of course, that size is the big thing. What, do you think the Bruins are trading for this guy for his personality? No. But of course, the big player is Trent Frederick going to the Edmonton Oilers. And this is interesting because Frederick is injured right now, and there's kind of doubt over whether he'll actually even be available for the rest of the regular season. So that's an interesting wrinkle to this that I don't love for the Oilers, especially in Frederick's case, where it's not even like he was great this year. He might need some chemistry to get going, and especially if that starts in the playoffs, I'm not sure if that's going to be all too successful. But as you guys can see, in 57 games this year, 8 goals, 7 assists, 15 points. Not great, especially after an 18-goal, 40-point campaign last year. But I think in Freddie's case, a lot of that was because of the situation around him and also not the greatest centers to work with. I mean, the players he was playing with the most were guys like Matthew Poitras, who are solid, but more on the defensive side of things. And I think in Frederick's case, he's never really had the center that he's truly needed to succeed, at least in Boston's system. It hasn't really worked out this year. But you could go to Edmonton where you could have a spot with a potential Leon Draisaitl pairing, Connor McDavid, and I think that makes it a lot better. But the intensity that Frederick can have, I want to see be more consistent at Edmonton, and I think that's what the Oilers are trading for here. When Frederick is at his best, he's tenacious, he can just absolutely bulldog you off the puck. He's somebody that I think can be a great effective forechecker and somebody that can really create havoc there on the ice, and I think that's what his value will be most at with Edmonton Hopefully he can get back healthy and get his confidence up so he can routinely be able to do that and fill that role for the Oilers. But I don't know, man, that injury just rubs me the wrong way. I really wanted to see him healthy for this Oilers team, and if he isn't until the playoffs, I think that's a pretty big letdown, especially since I don't know how successful he's going to be once he gets there because of all the time he's missed. So as for the trade grades, I'm going to give Edmonton a C+, the Bruins a B for the prospects and pick package they got, and I think for the Devils coming in as a third-team broker, getting a prospect like Shane Lachance who could be a decent fourth liner, not too bad. And as I mentioned, I'm going to give them a C+. But now we start getting into the big recent ones here, starting with the massive Bjorkstrand Gourde to Tampa Bay deal. And I absolutely love this for pretty much every single team involved. As for the details, Gourde at 75% retention goes to Tampa, along with Oliver Bjorkstrand and a 2026 fifth-round pick. In exchange to Seattle, they get Mikey Eyssimont, fourth liner for the Lightning. Could be something there. With a first-rounder in next year's draft, a first-rounder in 2027, a 2025 second-rounder, and then the Detroit Red Wings come in as a broker, getting a fourth-round pick in this year's draft, as well as the conditions, of course, in that 2026 and 2027 first rounder also being a part of things. And where to start with this deal? I mean, maybe with Tampa Bay, because I think for them, it's so interesting, this type of deal. I really only expected them to go after potentially a right wing, and Oliver Bjorkstrand made sense, but they also go after Yanni Gourde as a return to the two-time Stanley Cup champion for them. This is an exciting deal, though, for Tampa Bay, and I think really improves their depth in a massive projectable way for the playoffs, and I think really gives them an edge that they didn't quite have before, and that is really saying something considering they're with 10-1-1 over their last 12. Vasilevsky is caught on fire. I think this Tampa Bay team is looking scary for the playoffs, getting hot at the exact right time. Bjorkstrand, I think, is perfect for Tampa Bay, making $5.4 million for this year and next. He provides a little bit of term, a little bit of security for next season, and I think that is huge. Great playmaker, great vision, somebody I think could really connect there on that top six. You have a player like a Sorelli, who's also a good play connector, a lot to look forward to there. Then you got Yanni Gourde, who I think will most likely fill into that third line center spot. Could play wing if they do need to, so he brings some versatility there. But this season in 36 games, 6 goals, 11 points, 11 assists for 17 points. The production is going to be the biggest thing, but the experience, the leadership, the face-off ability, the tenacity of which he brings, and of course, that clutchness in the playoffs, which Tampa Bay has seen time and time again. Gourde was really the big surprise to me, mostly because of that cap hit, and especially with Bjorkstrand already being on the team, but that retention was huge for them, and you can see exactly why they want a player like Gourde. He's somebody that I think they kind of have missed in the playoffs the last couple of years. That depth, especially at the center position, is so huge and was one of the main reasons why they were able to win back-to-back Stanley Cups the way they were. Gourde was a big part of it. Or you could just do this, where the Lightning apparently have Yanni Gourde and Bjorkstrand on the third line with a player like Paul up to the second line. Oh my goodness. I mean, you could just do this and just be fine with it. Tampa now has the depth and the options to be so much more versatile than they were before, and I think that really gives Tampa Bay the edge that they didn't have before, the options, the ability to mix and match. And in this case, you basically have now a completely new third line, which is something that Tampa Bay has desperately needed. I look at the rest of the Eastern Conference, though, with Vasilevsky getting hot, with that top six looking absolutely lethal, now the third line options that Tampa Bay has, and things are looking interesting. I feel like they're right up there now among the Eastern Conference favorites, at least for me, especially at the right time getting hot. I think that is an important thing for a lot of contenders out there, and Tampa Bay is doing it in the right ways and bolstering a group that already was looking pretty good. And as has been talked about, for Tampa Bay, who the heck cares about the draft picks? Hedman, Vasilevsky, Kucherov, Point, you want to put the best players together while those guys are still at a playable age, and they are still looking fantastic. I think for all these teams involved, it's fantastic. I think for Tampa Bay, it's a straight A. For Seattle, it's a straight A as well. 2 first-rounders and a second-round pick. No-brainer there. And for Detroit, I guess a B-. Whatever. They're a part of this trade for no reason, but getting a 4th-round pick, it's fine. Now, afterwards, we saw Pittsburgh make a couple of interesting moves. First was Vincent Desharnais getting shipped to San Jose for a 2028 5th-round pick. Solid work. But then they go out and make a pretty major deal, landing both Luke Schenn and Tommy Novak from the Nashville Predators in exchange for Michael Bunting and a 2026 4th-round pick. Now, starting off on the Nashville Predators side, this is to me the more confusing one. I think Bunting is a fine player, and I think for the Predators especially, his forechecking ability is something that they could desperately use. That speed is which he plays the game, I think is also important for them. He hasn't had the greatest year, especially when we compare to how well he ended last year's season off with Pittsburgh. Last year after he got traded, had 19 points and 6 goals in 21 games. This year, I think has come back down to earth a little bit more. In 58 games, 14 goals, 15 assists for 29 points. A solid player, but I don't think is a foundational piece, more so a complementary player on any given line. But the Preds, I think, traded quite a bit away. First, you got Tommy Novak, who I'm not going to come out and say is my favorite player in the world. I love the skill set, and the creativity there is absolutely to die for at points. But I think often he kind of leaves you wanting more than he gives you. Last year, he had 45 points, his career high in 71 games. But this year has come back down to earth. The goal scoring has still been at a decent level, but the playmaking has severely dropped off the face of the earth and is only on pace for 30 points this year. I love the creativity, and he's somebody that, in terms of the micro stats, seem to always do well, but I think he's somebody that just often isn't as impactful or as much of a force consistently as you'd like. Maybe he's able to achieve that in Pittsburgh. Somebody to keep an eye out on for sure. And then you got Luke Schenn, who's a much more easy player to calculate. Big hitter, big physical presence, and somebody that has always done that. Not going to be giving you much offense, but we know who Luke Schenn is. He's a solid bottom pair, defensive, physical D, and that's all he'll ever be. Now, I like this trade for Pittsburgh a lot for multiple reasons. Sure, I think a player like Bunting might have more points than a player like Novak, but I do think I prefer the upside in a player like Novak, especially for a team like Pittsburgh, who I think could use more players like this that I think have more to give in their play. But you also have Luke Schenn a part of this, who I think could be a interesting potential sell option immediately after acquiring him. But the thing is, for Pittsburgh, if they decide to not sell him, he still has $2.75 million on his contract for next season. So if they want to keep him on for that defense, bring him still as a physical option for next year, they'll have the opportunity to. So it gives them a little bit of options here at this deadline. With the seller's market, personally, I think Luke Schenn could get underrated value, but if the Penguins decide to hold on to him, maybe they could trade him at the offseason, trade him at the beginning of the season, whatever they wanted to do, they'll have the options to do so. And I think in terms of just the pure upside in this deal, I think I prefer it from Pittsburgh's perspective. Definitely a confusing one at face value, especially for the Nashville Predators, but I think Bunting will be fine for them. I think the big confusion, though, just comes from the direction of this Predators team, what they want to be, what they'll actually decide to go for this offseason, to go for next year. It's going to be an interesting one for this Preds team and how much they turn over this roster. I want to see them make as many changes as possible, though, so this is, I guess, a charge in that direction. As for the trade grades, I'm going to give this trade a C+ for Nashville. It's kind of a wait and see for them to see how much Bunting is able to gel there. As for the Pittsburgh Penguins, though, I'm going to give them a straight B. I think the upside is there with Novak to be the best player in this deal, as well as potentially trading Luke Schenn in the future as a seller, and I just like that ability for Pittsburgh in this deal. I think they did quite well here. Now let's go on to a trade here that confused the heck out of me, and that is the Brian Dumoulin deal, which saw Dumoulin have 50% retention going to New Jersey in exchange for a 2025 second and prospect Herman Traff. Now, we talked about Brian Dumoulin quite a bit on this channel throughout this trade deadline process as a pretty dependable, reliable bottom pair defenseman who I think could get a lot at this deadline. 6'4", 214 pounds, has been doing his job for the Ducks this season. But I expected maybe a third-round pick, maybe a second-round pick if there was maybe another pick going back to the other team. But a second-rounder and a prospect? I was pretty surprised by that. And the prospect going back isn't some no-name either. It's Herman Traff, a former third-round pick by the Devils in last year's draft. Big size and big mobility for it. He's a good forward checker, very relentless with the puck, and somebody that I think just drives excellent results all around. I don't think he's going to be putting up major numbers in the NHL level, but for the SHL post-draft, 7 points in 25 games, I think has been a pretty big force there, and somebody that also was solid at the World Juniors too. Not a big name, but somebody that I think is a solid core of that Anaheim Ducks prospect pool going forward, and somebody that I think the Ducks especially will love. Big body, and I think especially on that fourth line, will be productive there. I'm not at all surprised the Ducks want a player like this. I mean, they've always seemed to draft players like this as well, but I think Traff does it effectively, and it's something the Ducks especially will love. But the fact that they were able to get a second rounder as well with a pretty interesting condition on it too, I think is impressive. As Chris Johnson notes, with that second round pick becoming conditional, Anaheim receives that conditional second round pick, which is the earlier of the Oilers or Jets selection. Now, we'll see how much it actually changes between there. Maybe there's a situation where both of these teams go on to the Western Conference Final, for example, and it isn't that much of a difference. But I think it's more like the Oilers one goes, especially with how the Jets are playing right now. So we'll see. That's an interesting wrinkle, though, where the Ducks get even more value a part of this deal. To me, this basically confirmed what we already knew, is that this was a seller's market, 110%. And for especially teams out there that have even like a 50-50 chance of making the playoffs, if I were them, I would 110% be going in the seller's direction. You got a second and a decent prospect who I think is an NHL future for a third pair defenseman. I'm trading basically everybody that's on my team that is expendable away and not even really thinking about it. To me, though, this trade is just so interesting from New Jersey's perspective. I get, of course, with the Dougie Hamilton trade, trading for a defenseman to fill that gap. Dumoulin won't obviously be up to that level, but still can play some strong minutes for them. But as soon as Jack Hughes was confirmed to be out for the season, for me personally, the season was as good as gone. I get trying to salvage things and trying to still make a push, of course, as a playoff team, but you will have to trade so much to even get close to the player that Jack Hughes is that I just don't think it's all that worthwhile, especially considering the Devils were already kind of on shaky ground with Jack Hughes. Without, I think it is an extreme uphill battle. Of course, a player like Dumoulin, and if they were to trade for him, a player like Brock Nelson will help and will give them a fighting chance, but I just think for the Devils, doing what they could have to potentially be a part of this seller's market could have brought a lot of value for next year, potentially. I know I'm spitballing there, and for the Devils in a playoff spot, they want to still have that revenue. They want to still make a push for it, but I feel like all these assets getting dealt away is really going to hurt that prospect pool long term for a year that, in my opinion, I just have no belief in. So for the trade grades, I'm going to give New Jersey a straight C, and for the Anaheim Ducks, I'm giving them an A+. I thought they absolutely killed it with this deal, and they get, in my opinion, a future NHLer and a second-round pick for a player like Dumoulin. It's a no-brainer every day, and the Ducks did really well here. Now, those are all the trades that have happened so far as I'm recording this. We'll see if any more end up happening, but I want to know in the comments down below for you guys, what do you think about all these trades? What do you think are the best ones, the worst ones, and how would you grade each and every single one? Let me know your thoughts down below. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, the notification bell if you haven't already, and share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online. I click on this card as well for all my trade content in one playlist. I hope you guys enjoyed the grades. Tomorrow we'll be live on both this channel as well as the Bleacher Report app with all the trade deadline frenzy and shenanigans and craziness, so I hope to see you guys there. Thank you guys so much as well for all the support throughout this week. I've been sick all throughout this week trying to put out content for you guys, so hopefully you enjoy, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.